Okay. All right, so the chapter we're going into is the chapter on digestion. We're going to try and pound this one through as quickly as we can, because I still would like to get into reproductive system, and if we can get a little bit of the nerves and special senses, I'd like to get us through that as well. The chapter 16 on the reproductive system is not going to take us long. We can do that in about 3.5, 4 days. So if we can work it out, hopefully we'll be able to get all of these in between now and then. So that's my hope. That's my goal. You'll notice on these handouts that there are a lot of terms, but there aren't a lot of definitions. So that's on purpose. So you're going to need to, as we get to each of the different terms, make sure that you're staying current with what should be written on those slides and jot that information down. So let's go ahead and just jump right on in. Digestive system includes both the alimentary canal and the accessory organs. All right, so what's the definition of the alimentary canal? The alimentary canal, by definition, is the pathway through which food is going to go, be digested, and be released. So technically, the alimentary canal would include mouth, esophagus, even before the intestines, stomach, intestines, and then the output, rectum and anus. All right, so what would teeth be? Accessory organs. All right, so what would a definition of an accessory organ be? Not part of the path, but aids in digestion and absorption. So teeth would be considered an accessory organ. Can you think of any other accessory organs in the oral cavity? Tongue. Can you think of any others that are in the neighborhood?
Uvula?
Yep, I would include the uvula. What else? You know them as 3. Saw them in the fetal pig. Salivary glands, including the parotid, underneath the jaw, submandibular, and the one that's underneath the tongue, sublingual. So the salivary glands, all of those would be accessory organs. Just like, ladies, when you accessorize, they aren't the main items, but they augment the main items when you get dressed up. So did you accessorize after you got your prom dress? Do you have a set of shoes? Have some type of a purse to carry your belongings in?
I got pockets.
All right, well, there you go. Did away with one of the accessories. Do you have appropriate jewelry that will go hand in hand with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're properly accessorized. Okay, so the alimentary canal is the main tube through which food is going to pass. Digestion is going to occur, but the accessory organs are what's going to help to make sure that that happens. Once you start getting into the digestive system, into the lower area, in the abdominopelvic chamber, can you think of some glands that would be down there that would be extremely important? One that starts with an L, not your lungs. Liver. Underneath the liver, kind of green. Gallbladder. Another one that branches off. In fact, we did that little diagram to help you remember The pancreas, right? Another one that's kind of adjunct to that helps to deal with blood and filter out, not kidneys, spleen, because that's going to dump stuff into the digestive system as well. Okay? So when we talk about all of those different structures that are adjunct to the alimentary canal, those are our accessory organs. All right, so what's the responsibility of the digestive system? The digestive system needs to be there to do the physical breakdown of food, most of which we do in doing what? Chewing. And then there's that whole process of kneading the food back and forth in our stomachs. That's a physical breakdown that's taking place. So we got to have a lot of muscles that are involved in this tissue. And in fact, all of the alimentary canal is surrounded by all sorts of different muscles. Everything from the muscularis externa all the way down to the muscles that are adjunct to the stomach. Those that are longitudinal, those that are circular, and those that are actually on an angle and oblique. You actually have 3 different muscle layers that work on your stomach alone. So you get to consider, how many of you had lunch today? All right? You're getting a workout right now without even realizing it. Your stomach is really busy right now churning back and forth to get that stuff liquefied. And it's going to mix with it all of the juices that come hand in hand with the secretions, the acidic material that's being released into there to activate enzymes, the digestive enzymes themselves, all of that stuff. And even before chemical breakdown takes place, I got to first physically break it down. So we're going to do some chewing. We're going to do some smushing with our tongue, with our cheeks, with our lips, and a lot of work with our teeth. And each of the teeth has its own particular set of functions as well. All right. In addition to that, we got chemical breakdown. Where does chemical breakdown start? In the mouth. Yeah. And if you want to prove that, you can take a bunch of dry soda crackers, saltines, put them in your mouth and chew. Don't swallow. Chew for about 5 minutes, and something ridiculously weird happens. Anybody ever try it? It will go from crack-a-mush to all of a sudden sweet. Very sweet. Well, what's happened? You've taken the gigantic starches and you broke them down into simple sugars. And you'll taste that in your mouth. I just watched a video on this because I was really kind of intrigued. It's one of those little teasers that they threw out. Why do we cook food at 350 degrees? It's like 350 is like the magic number. How many of you have ever noticed that when you're cooking, you bake stuff, you put it in, it's always 350 degrees unless it's a baked good. With baked goods, it's usually 425 to 450. In fact, a lot of our pizzas, we do at 450, 425. Why? Anybody know? I should leave you just hanging on pins and needles. I think that's what I'll do. Go ahead and look it up. Check it out on YouTube. There are actually some really wonderful videos that define specifically why 350 and 425 are the perfect temperature for doing the cooking of proteins and the cooking of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates tend to have to be at the 425, 450, and the 350, 375, primarily proteins. Take a look. You'll be amazed. You'll be amazed. All right? So chemical breakdown, extremely important. And then we got to absorb the stuff. So that's going to be the primary responsibility of what section of your digestive system? Intestines, small and large. What 2 things are you going to absorb? Nutrients and starts with a W? You don't want to absorb wastes. That would not be good. Water. And in fact, you use a tremendous amount of water in digestion. This is why it's extremely important to hydrate while you're eating. It will help and aid in the digestive process. Now, you don't lose that water, you'll actually reabsorb it. And it takes a fairly long period of time to do that. That's going to happen primarily in the large intestine. Small intestine, big time nutrients. Large intestine, primarily water. There are a few other things that you'll absorb in the large intestine, but the majority of all of that is going to be taking place nutrient-wise in the small intestine, water-wise in the large intestine. Okay, and then you got the last one, egest. So what does egest mean? Get rid of solid wastes. Okay, we have a tendency to use the word excrete. That's not a good word to use. Excretion should be only dealing with urea. So technically, the main organs that are involved in excretion are what? Your kidneys. They take care of all of that. Egestion takes care of all of the solid waste. Well, what about diarrhea? That's not solid. Well, it's supposed to be. The only reason that it isn't is you haven't absorbed enough of the water back. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the alimentary canal. Wonderful diagram. I'm going to tell you right now, you better know this diagram. Okay? There's nothing on this diagram that you will not know. You need to have all of them down. So that includes everything from the top oral cavity through the salivary glands, parotid, sublingual, and submandibular, the tongue, the esophagus, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, the stomach, the small intestine, and it's even got all of the parts of the small intestine and the large intestine. So you've got the duodenum, you have the jejunum, and you have the ileum, and then you have the cecum, and then the colon, which includes ascending, transverse, and descending. And then you've got the sigmoid colon, followed by the rectum and anus, and there's even the anal canal and the appendix. So that diagram, got to know it, get it down. We're going to take a look at each of those different areas and break it down. Now, technically, what's in the alimentary canal? All right, technically, in the alimentary canal, it's oral cavity, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, anus. Okay? All the rest is what? Accessory organs. Okay? So the alimentary canal is that central line that goes from the mouth, oral cavity, down through the digestive system and eventually out through the anus. All right? Questions? All the rest, accessory organs. All right, so let's start in the oral cavity and take a look at some of the structures that are in here. And then we've got them named on the following slides. So if we look at these areas, you're going to see some of these terms come up. So if you take a look, kind of flip back and forth between these, I don't know if you want to hinge the paper open so that you can kind of see it. It'll help in being able to see what we're dealing with in the diagram. All right, so labia, those are the first things you encounter. So what's another word for labia? Lips. Okay, you want to throw that in as a definition? That's a good one. Labia, lips. What's their job? Yeah, keep the food in. Can you imagine trying to eat without your lips? That would be challenging. Wow, seen it happen. Individual who went through mouth cancer. Anybody have an idea what that individual had a terrible habit doing that led to mouth cancer? CT, chewing tobacco. Not a good idea. Early age, mouth cancer. What do they do with mouth cancer? Cut it away. That's all you can do. So he lost most of his outer lower labia, part of his teeth, and part of the gum down into the jaw. He was very fortunate it didn't metastasize and go into the jaw. Otherwise, they would have had to remove his jaw. Can you imagine what life would be like without your lower jaw? Okay? So, why should boys and girls, we not chew tobacco? Because it is horrible for the percentage of people who end up with mouth cancer, what ends up happening. You remove that lower lip, you may as well understand for the rest of your life you're going to carry around with you a jewel rag, because that is the only way that you will be able to keep the fluids that are forming in your mouth from running down all over you. And imagine eating. That's going to be a messy thing. For many individuals who reach that point, they end up getting a feeding tube put in because eating is pretty much impossible. So, take good care of your teeth. Take good care of your mouth. Don't be doing stupid stuff. It ends badly, I can guarantee you. All right? So labia, there to hold in food. Now, right behind the labia is that area that I like to refer to as the cheek pouch. It's the empty space that's between your teeth and your cheek and your lips. And it has a name. It's called the vestibule. Okay? So the vestibule, maybe when you were in grade school, if you weren't allowed to chew gum, the teacher said, "Are you chewing gum?" You'd cheek pouch it, maybe jab it towards the back. How many of you are guilty of that one? Okay, good. At least you're willing to admit. First step in correcting the problem is admitting you have one, right? You do the little cheek pouch back there. That vestibule is the empty space in between. And that's where saliva will build up to help flush and clean the teeth. It's where food sometimes gets stuck and we have to work that back. And there's a lot of muscle that's in the cheek muscles. By the way, what is that cheek muscle that helps to hold the food on your teeth? Guys, remember, starts with a B. The buccinator. Good. Right? So that's the vestibule. All right, and then we run into the actual oral cavity proper. The oral cavity proper is the area behind your teeth. It's where your tongue hangs out. Now, what defines the top of the mouth? Two main sections. One of them is bone, and one of them is not. Hard palate and soft palate. All right, now we've talked about the hard palate. We talked about the palatine bone and the palatine process. So if you run your tongue down the middle of the roof of your mouth, you should feel a groove. Maybe even a little bit of a ridge. The ridge is because you're bilaterally symmetrical, and that would actually connect all the way up through to the sagittal suture. So you actually do have a sagittal suture that runs down the middle, separates it. By the way, if that doesn't close when you're a child, you're born with a cleft palate. So if that suture doesn't close appropriately, you're born with a gap. That's not a good thing, and we'll talk about why that's a problem later on. But the front part that is hard is the hard palate. All right? Wow. How many of you, when you run your tongue along that roof of your mouth, you get to a bump? Right? Just behind the bump is the trough. That's what we refer to as the soft palate. How many of you can touch the soft palate with your tongue? Okay. Don't go too far back or you'll gag. That's not good. Don't gag it. Okay, so if you go all the way back, which is really difficult, but some people have a flexible enough tongue, you'll get to the little thing that hangs down in the middle. Some people refer to it as the uvula. Some people refer to it as the uvula. As a kid growing up, we always called it the uvula. I've heard it pronounced both ways. It doesn't matter. Can you live without one? Yes, you can. I've actually seen individuals who had to have theirs removed because of actually a spot of cancer that grew on one. They had to clip his uvula. Can you live without it? Yeah, because what does it do? It doesn't do a whole lot, but it is associated with the gag reflex. So if you want to throw in there associated with gag reflex, that's why you got one. Which is why if you tickle that area, things don't go well. How many of you have ever had to have your throat swabbed for strep? It got so bad when I was in college, I had so many stupid strep tests. It just, they'd go back there, they'd be swinging around all day long. You could swab that thing all day long. There's no gag reflex. I could suppress it. So if you get in there and you're swabbing, it's okay, I'm not throwing up. I hope none of you ever get to that point. Stay current with your meds. It's not fun. But associated oftentimes with right near that area, gag reflex. And that definitely causes the reverse of regular swallowing and digestion. And that's not a pleasant thing. All right? And then we got our tonsils. What are the tonsils there for? Originally, we thought the tonsils were just vestigial organs that were on their way out. They actually do serve a purpose. They are part of your immune system. And we know that they function in an immune capacity. They will swell when you're dealing with infection. And typically, debris that gets caught in the back will get trapped inside of the tonsil, and the tonsil will take care of that debris. In fact, sometimes you will form little oval white objects that kind of stink, and it's a package of detritus, material that's breaking down, that your body has isolated and covered. And when it gets to the point where it pops free from the tonsil, you either will spit it out or you'll swallow it. How many of you have ever heard of those little things that pop out? Okay. Some people get them more easily than others. They may have had tonsillitis or inflammation of the tonsils or strep throat more frequently when they were younger, and it can cause those pockets to distend. I have fairly large pockets, so sometimes I will get those. There's actually a name for those. Tonsil otoliths. Little stones that form in your tonsil. That's what it means. And they just are dislodged. You swallow them, they get destroyed in your stomach. Weird. Or you spit them out. I had a chuckle. I had a student once who said, "Oh, we all call those stinkers because they have a horrible odor," which for some people who have really bad breath, part of the problem can be they get detritus and debris caught back in their tonsils, and it goes foul. And if that doesn't get cleaned out, it can lead to chronic bad breath. All right, pharynx. Let's go ahead and toss that one on in here. Pharynx is actually your throat. So if you want to kind of join all of those together with one word, pharynx is your throat. It starts behind your nasal passage, and we call that the nasopharynx. The part of your throat that is behind the mouth is called the what? Oropharynx. And that throat continues down to behind your voice box, in which case we call it the laryngopharynx. So you have three parts to your throat. Nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx. Let's say those three together. Nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. I always like putting a little trill on the R just because it's fun. What else are we going to talk about? We got to throw in epiglottis and, yeah, we'll throw in epiglottis. All right, so this flap right here is the epiglottis. By the way, what would be right down in this area? In the fetal pig, you saw them. V4, vocal cords. So your vocal cords are going to be right down in this area. This section right here is your larynx. And it's associated with what? The hyoid bone. What does the hyoid bone do? It allows you to move your larynx to change the pitch. So your hyoid bone is extremely important in allowing you to raise and lower your voice. And some of the masculine changes that we have that are secondary sexual characteristics for guys are involved in the position, size, and shape of the larynx. So usually around age 13, 12, 13, your voice begins to change. And theoretically, by the time you're 17, your pitch should be pretty much where you're going to be at for the rest of your life. So I went from being high soprano kind of to tenor by the time I was in high school, and now I'm more into the bass register when I sing. Now, can you change that and affect that with vocal training? Absolutely. Which is also why we need to think of our voice as being a muscle, because it actually is. And that's why Mr. Thiel does what with you guys in choir and concert corps? You do your warm-ups. Because you don't go just out onto the court and start playing basketball. You should warm up beforehand, right? You do the exact same thing with the voice. And all of the muscles that are going to be associated with it. And by the way, there's a lot of muscle memory that comes hand in hand with that. And if you don't believe there's a lot of muscle memory in there, deal with somebody who's suffering from dementia. What do they forget to be able to do? You're demonstrating it right now. Talk. They forget how to speak. In late stages, they can't put together syllables. They can't think of words, and they can't get those words to come out. My father-in-law is in one of those early stages of aphasia. So when he's trying to remember words, they don't always come to him. And his go-to when he's confused, And then sometimes it comes to him. So when we talk about muscle memory, all of the vocalizations that we produce, those are all stored within our memory and pass from one area of our brain to another to control the motion and movement, all synchronized with our breathing to push air out, to reverberate and vibrate those vocal cords in voiced sounds, as well as those that we do not voice. Difference between voiced and unvoiced. Let me see if I can remember a couple of them. Oh, make the sound of the second letter in the alphabet. Say it out loud. B. 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 Okay, now, make the sound of the letter that comes after O. You use the exact same muscles in the mouth, but in B, you push air across your vocal cords. In P, you don't. Voiced, B. Unvoiced, P. Want to go into studying language? It's called linguistics. You can spend a lifetime learning all about the vocalizations that we produce. In our language set, there are certain vocalizations we don't use. In Spanish, which sounds do we include that we don't use in regular English? Oh, come on. How many of you are in Spanish? The N with the squiggly. What do they call that? Enye. And what's the double L? Okay? And those are sounds that we normally don't vocalize within our own English language. If we were from certain areas of Africa, right, the ticks and clicks that we can make with the roof of our mouth are vocalizations that they use in their language set and are part of their muscle memory. And those work very hand in hand with their combination of sounds that they use for making language. So depending on the different ethnicities, you have different vocalizations that you'll use and different sequences that those vocalizations are worked in. Some vocalization sets are very prominent in certain languages, and in others they aren't. Questions? All right? Did you ever think that there was that much just in one section of your body? And we could go on for hours. All right? Trachea is just your respiratory tube. And what's this bottom part where the laryngopharynx connects? The esophagus. And the opening that leads into the trachea that the epi above glottis closes when you swallow is called the what? Glottis. So the glottis is right here. The epiglottis folds down when you swallow. And that actually is triggered by nerve impulse. Now, if something is touching on that ring of the glottis, the epiglottis will stay in a closed position, even if it means depriving you of being able to breathe. So a number of years ago, when my sister-in-law was a teacher, second grade teacher, she was in the lunchroom. One of the little kids got a piece of hot dog caught back there. She did the universal sign for choking. And remarkably enough, stood up and wanted to go towards the bathroom, which is the number one place people who are choking to death die. Isn't that weird? We don't want to make a scene, so we try to leave and go to a place where we can deal with it on our own, which is absolutely the worst thing possible, right? So my sister-in-law saw the little one, you know, she ran over and did the, right, abdominal compression. Abdominal thrust, I think, is the proper phrase they use now. And my sister-in-law said, they tell you it's going to make a popping sound, and they are absolutely right. Out came this chunk of hot dog. And that kid just started crying. But what was the very first sound she made? Right? Inflate the lungs. Why? Because the object that was blocking your airway is now gone. She was also quite surprised at how far that chunk of hot dog went. It's like 7-8 feet that sucker popped out of that kid's mouth. So, another reason why you stand behind them when you do that, because you don't want to be in the way of what's coming. Not a good idea. I never thought I would ever have to do it. And then my father-in-law took too large of a chunk of ham one Easter, and we were sitting in the kitchen, and all of a sudden Dad gets up, and he's got this kind of strange look on his face, and where does he go? He's heading towards the bathroom. And I looked at him and I said, "Can you breathe?" And he looked at me and his eyes were really wide, And as he stepped to go past me, I stepped in between his legs, grabbed him around the waist, which is a little bit of a challenge. He's a big man. Took me 2 tries. Second one, out came the ham. Bad ham. Bad ham. Yeah, it did. It actually did pop. And everybody was like, oh. And I whispered in his ear, remember me in your will. No, I didn't say it. You owe me now. All right, alimentary canal, did we get them all? Labia, yes, we got it. Hard palate, yes, we got it. Soft palate, yes, we got it. Those separate the oral cavity from the nasal cavity. It's also what we push against when we It's also what you push against when you what? Swallow. Can't swallow if you don't have a hard palate. Oh, what's the problem with little children and cleft palates? They oftentimes starve to death. Why? They can't suckle. They can't draw in because they can't create a vacuum. And because they can't suckle, they can't get nutrients. So a lot of children in third world nations will die long before they would ever be eligible for cleft palate surgery. Those that actually do survive are oftentimes hand-fed, and a lot of what they get in their mouth actually comes back out through their nose because there's nothing to keep the swallowing process working properly. So it's a challenge, and this is why physicians abroad are really very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. All right, uvula, we got that one in there. We talked about the vestibule. We talked about the oral cavity proper. We talked about the tongue and, papillae. What are the papillae? Or papillae? Taste buds. Okay? Chemo, C-H-E-M-O, receptors. Chemoreceptors. We'll talk more about those in a little bit. Oh my goodness, do you have lots of them? The frenulum. Turn to your neighbor. Open your mouth. Lift your tongue. So as tuck in the top of your mouth and keep your mouth open. The thing that connects your tongue to the bottom of your mouth is called the frenulum. Now, how many of you can stick your tongue out of your mouth? Good. None of you are tongue-tied. But if the frenulum does not detach when you're born, the tongue will stay attached behind the lower teeth, and you develop a very bad speech impediment. We had a very good friend of ours whose 6-year-old child had difficulty with speech. They didn't know what was wrong, so they took him to the doctor, and the doctor looked at him and said, "Oh, you're tongue-tied. We can fix that." Took a wad of gauze, grabbed onto the tip of his tongue, lifted up, and used the scissors and snipped it. No numbing, nothing. Snip!
Wait, seriously?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Ah! Lots of screaming afterwards. Yeah, not a good thing.
He didn't see it coming.
No, he didn't. And I wonder why Todd never wanted to go back to the doctor again. I don't think I'd want to go back to that one.
I didn't.
Unbelievably barbaric. And yet, with just a little numbing, that's exactly what they do. And then tonsils we talked about. And I think we already got pharynx with nasal, oral, and laryngopharynx. And the esophagus is we're going to pick up tomorrow. Thursday, what's going on? Good. God's blessings. Have a great rest of the day. Practica.